Welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. As we continue to celebrate International Women's Month, we're going to have a conversation this morning about women still facing workplace challenges. To do that, I want to welcome the head of Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Dr. Ann Barratt. Good morning to you, Dr. Barratt.
Good morning, Rawkus. A pleasure to be here with you today.
How are you doing this morning?
Well, this morning I'm battling a bit of a flu, one of those challenges women face in the workplace, but still holding on and trying to work as best as I can and have a clear conversation with you.
And I appreciate you pushing through to have this conversation. You're going to be chatting with Natasha and myself. And, I really want to start the conversation by asking from where you sit. Have you seen lots of evolution in women's, first of all, their influence in the workplace and their role in the workplace?
Yes, indeed. I think in the Caribbean, and I shall say the globe over, women have had greater presence in the workplace, be it corporate, state, industry, and so forth. Definitely, over time and much advocacy and much performance, women have moved beyond stereotypically sex-marked roles to roles outside of these stereotypes, jobs that they should do. Women have also taken up positions of leadership. Women have worked in, a range of industries, and that's a fact. By the way, I should background that by saying that in the Caribbean, women have always worked. But there was a period of time when there was an attempt to dress that back, if I can use local parlance. So yes, there has been evolution. How? And the frequency, the prominence, and the relevance of women's what we call productive labor.
All right, perfect. Now, one of the things you mentioned there was women taking up more leadership roles. How have we as a society responded to women's leadership or performance as leaders?
I think that's a work in progress, to be honest with you, Rawkus, because though women have taken up leadership roles, though women perform leadership, women as leaders is not seen as an inherent element of themselves, their selfhood, in the sense that when we have a woman leader, let's say in a really prominent leadership position that is very prestigious, very powerful, we evaluate that leadership very much on gendered elements rather than leadership elements. Another element is forms of leadership are measured against this unsaid standard, and women's ways of leading is yet to be given legitimacy in the workplace. Leadership should be based on how efficient it is in context and for the people who are in that context. However, oftentimes we have this constant measuring of women leaders, however effective or not effective or in between they may be, against a yardstick that does not rest in femininity or womanhood. So we continue to work on that, in that we have women leaders, but we don't necessarily see women as natural leaders or having some inherent capacity to lead. And that is where we continue to face challenges. It's not that they don't have the opportunity, but the right to participate and the legitimacy of that participation is often called into question.
So, Dr. Barratt, are you saying that we don't measure it based on performance? Because you're saying that it's not measured based on femininity, right? But I'm curious as to whether we should be basing it on that or should we be basing it on performance? Because at the end of the day, we want our leaders to be able to yield results, yeah?
Let me rephrase what I said and make it a little clearer.
Okay.
We measure that leadership based on how does this woman meet some imagined standard of a real leader, which tends to be male and masculine and not female and feminine. So we say, oh, we have a woman in this position. She then must meet the standards of the position, which are not inherent to her. Let's say she applies a form of leadership that does not match the standard that we see as feminine ways of being. For example, let's say she's nurturing in the position. We say, oh, she's quite motherly. But the legitimacy of that leadership as standard is not attached to her body or her embodiment of leadership. So that's what I mean. So really and truly, what I am suggesting is what you are saying. We must measure all leaders, whatever their sex and gender, based on performance as a leader in context and situation. That continues to be a work in progress.
Okay.
Excellent. Dr. Barratt, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to go back to a little bit earlier in the conversation this morning when you mentioned particularly gendered elements. For those of us out there who are now approaching the conversation, share with us exactly what would you consider and what are gendered elements so we know what to look out for.
Of course, you mean in terms of leadership, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say traditionally leadership has been measured, and I'm suggesting that I would say traditionally, according to the status quo, leadership is measured based on decisiveness, assertiveness, dominance, capacity to influence or persuade, and all of these, being in charge, the boss. These were supposedly masculine qualities. In our culture, feminine qualities are the ability to create cohesiveness and bonds and nurturance and develop relationships. These are stereotypically gendered traits or gendered ways of being. So when you have what is not the status quo taking place, we have a woman leader in a dominant position that was once considered a male role. These are gendered role type relationships. Then we have this measuring. Is she as decisive? Is she as assertive? Is she as clear? Does she have the ability to do what is needed in the job? Is she strong enough? Is she powerful enough? Further, if this woman is all of those things, then she might be too much of it. So she is too dominant, she is too decisive, and she becomes the pejorative. So now she's trapped between trying to find balance in that role, which was marked by masculinity and not femininity or feminine ways of being. So when we talk about those gender marked roles, we talk about these traits that we've attached over time to them. And then leadership becomes mediated or negotiated by those perspectives or roles, I apologize, marked by those expectations of that role.
Wow. All right. Yeah, definitely. I felt you there, especially when you said too much.
Now, I
Yes.
really want to know, though, Dr. Barratt, how do we get society to be able to adjust that way of thinking, to adjust that expectation of women to be more dominant or whatever, all those elements that you called out in the leadership position? How do we get them to understand? How do we get society to understand that you can lead, but you don't have to be those traits?
That's an excellent question. I just came from the Commission on Status of Women, hence I'm so sick because of the cold weather. But there was a conversation that was had across the board that I think would help us move beyond that. That is this. Whatever one's sex body, it does not matter. This is a person who has the qualifications, the experience, the capacity for the training and the mentorship to do a job, and we allow that person to perform that job as is needed in a most relevant way. In other words, put aside the markings that we attach to these bodies and say, okay, we have 10 leaders and we have 10 this and we have that. No, you have a leader, and this leader is measured on the capacity to fulfill the task, the purpose, guide those who are working under that person, keep people accountable, do it with integrity. So the traits of the job as is needed, the things that are needed for productivity or for effectiveness, and we apply that to a person. In other words, we will know that we don't have to keep pointing out an exception when we accept a person as a leader, whatever they are, whoever they are, and say, this person is a leader. That's one way. We think not gender neutral. This is not gender neutrality. This is, we see the legitimacy of all candidates in an equitable way. That's one. And number two, we stop expecting leadership to take singular forms. If we look within categories of male or categories of female, you have different types of leaders, correct? And so we allow for that variability. If a person is effective in context, You know your team, you know they respond to particular things, and you say, okay, I shall then apply this. So second point is we allow for variability. We see across difference. So I think it's really important to answer your question directly, that we stop measuring sex bodies. We have this new person, new prime minister, it's a woman. Or it's basically we have a leader that happens to be a particular sex or gender. And then, of course, variability.
So, Dr. Barratt, one of the things that we're hearing a lot of right now, of course, is we also need to look at the way that we approach things, just as individuals as well. Reframing our mindset is so important. But let's also talk about the fact that there are also some policies that need to be looked into, budgeting, social protection, and so much more. Can you expound on that?
Yes. I think as women work, whether they're leaders or in the workplace, and as International Women's Day come up, International Women's Month is a month for us, yes, to celebrate and recognize women and their contribution to our society. But it's also a moment where we can come out and assert those things we continue to work on and advocate for and fight for, because not all women, live the same lives and bear the same reality. So, for example, let's say we have a woman who's working in productive economy. She's whatever profession, like yourself. She also bears the burden of care. She also bears the burden of care for children, for the elderly, which we call the multiple shifts that these women have to work with differently to how her male partner or her male family members may have to bear. She now has to also negotiate a financial system that may not be fully structured towards her development. There are elements in place in different spaces and countries. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have our own legislative framework. We can tweak it, we can add to it. But when it comes to financing, gender-responsive budgeting, social protections, and again, protection from violence, which is a huge impeding factor, both in the private and the public, women workers continue to grapple with those factors. Now, some of us may sit at levels where we say, oh, I've gone past this. I'm comfortable. I've got all I need. But there are some that do not. In addition, we too, as women, to take from your perspective, may take advantage or take for granted access to other women workers who make our lives possible and plausible. And they function, again, with challenges around financing, around protections, the vulnerability to violence or limited health care, and so much more. So we continue to grapple with these interceding factors that make labor complicated, attached to our care work, attached to our sex bodies and our sexualities, and attached to how we are viewed as viable investments in our society as workers. And by the way, that was the theme. How do we lift women and girls out of poverty through these policy interventions? So I think these continue to be sites of challenge. And as we work on them, we make it better for women to not only work, but to lead, and to lead fairly and comfortably.
All right. Well, Dr. Barratt, I think we can stick a pin in it there for this morning. I want to thank you so very much for joining us and for having this conversation. I know it's one that will be ongoing for a while, and we're going to hopefully be able to change society slowly but surely into thinking the right way when it comes to women in the workplace and women leaders in the workplace for sure. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, and especially under your conditions, and all the best. I hope you recover soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You as well. Take care. That's Dr. Ann Barratt, head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, just sharing with us some of the challenges women still face in the workplace and how we can do our part to overcome them. We take a quick break and we come back with more. We're chatting with more women in the workplace when we come back. Stay tuned.